All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
Well, some pretty significant primary battles are shaping up for next week in the states of Kentucky and New York. We've previewed a few of those races here already. In particular, progressives are really excited about their chances with Charles Booker in the Kentucky Senate Democratic primary and Justice Democrat Jamaal Bowman, who's challenging incumbent Eliot Engel in a New York congressional district. So here are the basic dynamics of those two races. In Kentucky, Charles is up against Chuck Schumer and the DSCC's hand-picked candidate, Amy McGrath. McGrath gained some national prominence in her losing congressional bid last year based on a biographical ad about her time as a fighter pilot. She's made massive missteps in her Senate primary bid thus far, including a complete faceplant on an obvious question about whether or not she would have voted to confirm Brett Kavanaugh, and the bizarre consultant-driven strategy of painting herself as more pro-Trump than Mitch McConnell. She's performed exceptionally well, however, in the only area that Dem establishment really seems to care about. That would be money. She's raised millions from wealthy resistance Dems from all over the country, and at last FEC report had more than $19 million in the bank. So while voters might not be too impressed with the consultant industrial complex making her terrible ads, is loving the grift. And while McGrath is regurgitating her memorized talking points, here's Charles.
Now, I know everybody has good intentions when they say let's peacefully protest. I know they mean well, but peace is not the absence of violence intention. Peace is the presence of justice. Y'all know who said that. We want peace. We're standing because we deserve peace. This is about our humanity. No matter how the sun has kissed your skin, you know that if somebody hurts your black brother or sister, it hurts you too.
So that's Kentucky. Now, in a district that includes portions of the Bronx and Westchester County, longtime incumbent Eliot Engel, who is chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, is facing a very serious primary challenge from former middle school principal Jamaal Bowman. It was looking like a real uphill battle for Jamaal until the other progressives in the race honorably exited and threw their support behind Mr. Bowman so that he would have a shot to ultimately win. And it looks very much like the momentum is on his side. Engel's made a series of extraordinarily boneheaded moves, which have exposed how disconnected he is ultimately from the district. And Bowman has impressed, racking up national progressive endorsements from AOC, from Bernie, Elizabeth Warren, and even managed to win the backing of the New York Times. A new poll from Data for Progress has Bowman up 10 points on Engel, although a significant chunk, 27%, remain undecided. It's no wonder voters are impressed.
The wealthy and corporate actors have taken over our political system, both Democrat and Republican. So our elected officials are more beholden and accountable to corporations than they are to the grassroots people in their communities.
Hear, hear. Now, here's what's interesting about both of these races. So in both instances, Charles and Jamaal have surged on the strength of clear-eyed messages about racial and economic justice, a message that establishment Democrats at least claim to support through their rhetoric and also their elaborate kente cloth displays. In both instances, Charles and Jamaal represent exactly the type of new diverse leadership that the party claims to want to care about. Jamaal is seeking to represent a diversifying part of New York, is an educator, spoke powerfully and painfully about the discrimination he has personally suffered at the hands of the police. Charles, who is already the youngest black lawmaker in the Kentucky legislature, would be a truly historic figure in a mostly white state who hails from one of the most segregated cities in the entire country. And yet, for some reason, the National Democratic Party establishment has thrown all in with their white opponents. Schumer and the DSCC reportedly started talking to McGrath about running for Senate even before her losing congressional run was over. They very clearly did not heed the advice of anyone in Kentucky, because if they had, they would have run the other way. But not only does McGrath raise lots of money for the grift machine, she also will dutifully parrot whatever talking points are given to her from whatever extremely dumb corporatist consultants that the DSCC has put on her campaign. Hillary Clinton emerged to wade into her first Democratic primary contest of the cycle, backing Eliot Engel and his very bad foreign policy views. Yesterday, Schumer and Cuomo, two towering figures in establishment Dem New York politics, also both jumped into the race, backing Engel. Adam Schiff has endorsed Eliot Engel's re-election bid as well, and this one is actually a real head-scratcher. The powerful members of the Congressional Black Caucus, including Representatives Jim Clyburn, Hakeem Jeffries, Gregory Meeks, and Maxine Waters, have all backed Eliot Engel. The black voters in the district apparently aren't too impressed, however, in spite of the fact that we are relentlessly told that black voters are conservative and back establishment figures. Bowman's poll shows him leading Engel among black voters by a margin of 56 to 10. Now, isn't it interesting that the moment a progressive jumps into a race, suddenly all the talk of diversity and new leaders seems to go out the window. Isn't it funny how black voters should be central and determinative as long as they are acting in concert with the whims and desires of the establishment? So interesting how the Democratic Party will use the multiracial working class as the backdrop for their photo ops, but seem to get very uncomfortable about actually allowing them to have power. It's almost like all their talk about valuing diversity is so much bullshit, weaponized selectively only when it serves to further their corporate and imperialist agenda. Kind of sort of feels like they don't actually believe their own representation identity politics rhetoric, but only use it to make deeply regressive policies feel somewhat progressive. I could swear that they fight harder against any sort of Bernie-style progressive than they do against the similarly corporate and military-industrial complex-friendly Republicans. But I must be mistaken. Surely there must be some other explanation for why the national Democratic establishment is doing everything in their power to crush two charismatic, brilliant, passionate new black leaders at this time of incredible national reckoning around racial justice. Could someone please explain it to me? Because given what they say and the values they claim to support, it just doesn't make any sense. And Sagar, I was sort of inspired by Ryan Grimm tweeted out like that poll and the margin that Jamaal Bowman holds among black voters and how much that flies in the face of the narrative we've been sold from establishment Democrats about black voters and their ideology and who they line up behind as a way of protecting the status quo, like justifying it because, oh, this is the center of the party, this is the base of the party, but they only care when it serves their interests.
Of course. It's not. Oh, it's almost like black Americans, like all Americans, are not a monolith group, and you can't classify them as one group and who believe in one thing, and then people who live in New York City might be a little bit different from people who live in South Carolina. Shocker.
Interesting.
But it's also just very telling that the moment you have a candidate who is anti-corporate and doesn't believe in the identity politics paired with the pro-corporate agenda, boom, out the window.
Yeah.
And then you have the CBC jumping in on behalf of Elliot Engel for a reason, is that established power is only purpose is to further the power of that establishment.
Yeah.
If they don't want to take away, because
power protects power.
Exactly, and they know that the more that they go against Jamaal Bowman, if that Jamaal Bowman comes in and starts throwing bombs to the CBC, because they have to let him in, right? If the moment that he starts going against their pro-corporate agenda, the moment that he starts aligning around things that they cannot control, then they're screwed, because they're going to see that actually there's a wide range of issues that black Americans care a lot about, and if Jamaal Bowman accurately represents the views of his district and not of a pro-corporate ideology, he's a huge threat to them.
Well, there's a big danger when you go all in against someone, right? If they, and by the way, I think it was Dave Wasserman who, was very sort of down the middle, calls balls and strikes on this stuff yesterday, who was like, I would be surprised at this point if Jamaal Bowman did not defeat Elliot Engel because the polls have moved so dramatically and there's been such a consolidation and Engel has just made a fool of himself in every way he possibly can. Like calling AOC a dictator, total caricature, lying about whether he's in the district, saying he only cares about racial justice because he has a primary. I mean, it's been one thing after another. And that's a very dangerous situation for the establishment because, look, sure, AOC is one person and, has somewhat been co-opted into the institution at this point. But when she first came in and was protesting outside of Nancy Pelosi's office, forcing them to deal with the Green New Deal that they didn't want to, and still holds enormous popular power to move the conversation and force Democratic leaders to have to live up somewhat to their values, like just one person or just a handful of people who don't owe their election to the Democratic establishment is very dangerous. I mean, same thing with Charles Booker in Kentucky. And, I love Kentucky, so I look for every excuse to talk about it. But it really is a remarkable situation unfolding. Amy McGrath has had, at the last FEC report, $19 million in the bank. I saw some stat. She has spent more in this Democratic primary than Andy Beshear spent in his entire gubernatorial race.
It's like Beto money.
It's insane. I mean, and Kentucky media markets are not that expensive either. So she has all the money in the world. Charles is running a grassroots campaign. He is raising more money now, but it is nowhere near the millions that Amy has spent. I mean, he may easily get outspent 20 to 1, certainly 10 to 1. And he really has a chance to pull this thing off because people in Kentucky just rejected this person. The National Party swooped in and tried to say, this is the one, we're going to anoint her, resistance Dems around the country, open up your purse strings. I think she's raised like 97% of her money from out of state, massive disparity between in-state and out of state. And the people in Kentucky are like, no. This isn't the direction we're going to go in. This person doesn't stand for anything. They're embarrassing. They're going to lose. And so despite that massive disparity, Charles may end up winning the nomination. And again, this is dangerous because this is a person you don't control. This is a free person.
Yes.
Doesn't owe you anything. In fact, they would probably delight in sticking in your face a little bit because of the way that they were treated. So look, it's one thing. Elliot Engel's an incumbent. They're going to protect their own. I get it. But in Kentucky, why'd you get in on behalf of Amy McGrath? Why did you jump in so early? Why?
Yeah.
The only reason is because she could raise so much money.
Yes, that's all they want. All they want is to raise money.
And her terrible consultants making her terrible TV ads are making lots of money off of it.
A lot of cash.
Yep.
Well.
Next on Rising, friend of the show, Nina Turner, weighs in on the charges against the two officers involved in Rayshard Brooks' death. That when Rising returns.